Have you ever wondered what forgotten stones would say if they could speak? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where silent watchers rise from tide, ice, and tundra. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. The stones that guarded the tides. The west of Ireland begins with wind. Not a harsh wind, not always, but a wind that knows every story the Atlantic has carried across its ancient waters. It moves through the grasses, brushes along the low stone walls, and bends around the old houses built from the bones of the land. In Connemara, that wind carries 1,000 years of salt, memory, and distance. Beyond the roads, past the last fisherman's cottage and the narrow paths that weave between bog and meadow, the land meets the ocean in a way that feels older than the world around it. The shoreline does not rise in cliffs here, nor does it bow into soft beaches. Instead, it crouches low, as if leaning forward to listen to the sea. And it is here, along a quiet stretch of this rugged coast, that the granite watchers of Connemara rise from the earth like the worn teeth of some ancient giant. They are not carved, nor arranged. They are not even identical, but together they form a line of guardians rounded, smoothed, shaped by the tides into silent sentinels who stand watch over the meeting place of land and water. You walk toward them slowly, following the curve of the shore. The air smells of seaweed and salt, of the Atlantic's breath. Waves roll in long, steady lines, spreading white foam across the stones before withdrawing again. The ground beneath your feet is a mix of coarse sand and small pebbles, each one shaped by centuries of tumbling tides. At first, the granite watchers appear as simple boulders, gray, round, unmoving. But as you draw closer, you see the pattern each stone positioned by nature in a way that mimics deliberate design. They form a gentle arc, facing the sea, their rounded shapes tilted slightly forward. Some appear taller, others sit low, half buried in sand. Together they resemble a group of old men leaning toward the water, listening. The stones are enormous, up close. Some stand higher than your waist, others nearly to your shoulders. Their surfaces are smooth, so smooth that they reflect the muted Irish light like polished bone. Centuries of wind, rain, and storm have shaped them into perfect curves. You place your palm against one. It feels surprisingly warm, holding the sun's faint heat. The stone's surface is soft to the touch, worn by time into gentle hollows. This part of Connemara is known by many names, but the older fishermen call it Cloch Cosanta Naditan, the stones that guarded the tides. The legend is simple, quiet, like most things in the west of Ireland. They say the stones once held back a great storm, that when a winter tempest rose from the Atlantic, roaring and angry, these boulders stood like sentinels and softened the blow. Some say the stones were once part of a larger ridge, a natural breakwater lost to the tides. Others say they have always stood here older than settlements, older than memory, older even than Ireland itself. You walk between them, weaving through their rounded shapes. The wind changes as you do, softening when you stand among the stones, as if they shoulder the breeze on your behalf. The sound of the waves shifts too, becoming slightly muffled, as though the stones absorb part of the ocean's voice. You climb gently onto one of the taller boulders. From here, the view opens. The Atlantic stretches endlessly westward, its surface flickering with silver and shadow. In the distance, clusters of dark rocks rise from the water, small islands, sea stacks, pieces of the coast worn by time. Behind you, Connemara's hills rise in muted green and purple, patchworked with heather and long grasses swaying in the wind. You sit on the stone and feel its steady warmth. It radiates through your palms and into your skin, sinking deeper into your bones. The stone is neither smooth nor rough. It carries the exact texture that only centuries of tide polishing can create. You feel the weight of its history beneath you, solid, grounded, unmoving. A gentle wave crashes against the shore. Foam rushes forward, swirling in long white arcs around the bases of the watchers. The water curls around the boulders and retreats, as though acknowledging their presence. The stones do not move, not even a tremor. They feel rooted, anchored to something more permanent than sand. You walk along the line again. Each stone carries its own shape, some slightly elongated, some perfectly round like great eggs of the earth. A few bare faint scars, thin creases etched by time. The Atlantic's breath has polished them, but it has also marked them with the smallest signatures of age. The tide begins to rise. You watch as the waves crawl higher, filling the spaces between the boulders. Water pools around the bases, cooling the air. Seaweed, long and green, drifts around your ankles like strands of forgotten hair. The stones stand steady. As the water climbs, something remarkable happens. The spaces between the boulders begin to sing, not loudly, not clearly, but softly, tiny whistles of air slipping between stone and wave, forming a faint, breath-like hum. The sound blends with the wind, creating a song only these stones can make. It rises and falls as the tide shifts, forming a quiet rhythm that soothes rather than stirs. The hum deepens slightly when a large wave rolls in. It echoes between the boulders, curling around the granite in soft vibrations. You lean closer and rest your ear near one of the stones. The sound is subtle, but unmistakable. The stone holds the resonance like an instrument. Locals say the watchers sing to warn the land of storms. Others say the stones speak to the sea, reminding it to be gentle. But older voices, those of the elders who grew up beside these waters, say something different. They say the stones are not singing, they are remembering. The sun begins to slip behind a curtain of clouds. Shadows stretch across the stones in muted, elongated shapes. The tide reaches its peak, swirling at the feet of the stace, guardians. The wind grows quiet again. You sit once more, letting the calm settle into your chest. The air smells of salt, stone, and far-off rain. The sky darkens to soft gray. A moment of deep stillness falls over the shore. It is then that you understand the stones, not through explanation, but through presence. They do not guard the coast by force. They guard it by memory. They hold the stories of storms past, the shapes of winds long gone, the rhythm of tides across centuries. They have watched generations come and go, watched boats set sail and never return, watched the Atlantic breathe across the world. You walk slowly toward the last stone in the line. It is the smallest, barely reaching your knee. But when you touch it, the stone feels just as warm, just as alive as the largest of the watchers. You turn your eyes to the sea. Gentle waves roll against the shore. The light fades into evening. A soft mist begins to drift across the rocks. You stand among the watchers, feeling the air shift once more. The stones hold the world in quiet balance. The Atlantic continues its eternal conversation with the land. And in that space between wave and granite, you feel the truth of Connemara, wild, patient, ancient. The tide recedes, the hum fades, but the watchers remain, facing the ocean as they always have, guarding not with strength, but with the soft certainty of time. This is the Connemara coast. These are the stones that guarded the tides, and they will stand long after the waves forget the steps they take. The idols that the tide remembered. Along the western edge of Ireland, where the wind moves as if it remembers every life that has ever passed through it, the sea keeps secrets under shifting layers of foam and tide. There are shores here where the Atlantic seems to breathe in slow, ancient rhythms, touching the land not as water touches rock, but as a returning traveler greets a forgotten home. Achill Island is the largest of the Irish Isles, a place carved by storms and held together by long memories. It is a landscape of cliffs that hide their faces in mist, of peat fields that drink the rain like old companions, and of stones, countless stones that have been shaped by wind, salt, and the patient sculpting hands of time. But among all those countless stones, there are a few on Achill's westernmost shores that people whisper about. They are not carved by any tool. They are not arranged by any ancient architect. They stand, or lean, or lie just beneath the shifting sands, resembling shapes that are almost too intentional to be accidents. Faces that aren't quite faces. Eyes that are only barely suggested. Shoulders and torsos that might be tricks of a tired imagination, or might be something older, something placed there when the world was quieter and more easily moved by unseen forces. These stones are known, in quiet circles, as the idols that the tide remembered. Their story is not written in any ancient manuscript, nor preserved in the archives of any museum. Instead, it is carried in murmurs between islanders, in the memories of fishermen, in the tales told by peat fires, when the night grows long and the wind sways the thatched roofs like drifting sails. To understand these stones, you have to slow down, slow enough to hear the silence beneath the waves, slow enough to let the island's rhythm settle into your breath. If you stand on Keem Bay at dusk, when the last gold light slides low over the water, you can see a faint outline of something on the distant shore. a ridge of dark shapes that seem to shift slightly when the tide moves. They might look like nothing at first, just rocks, just another part of the island's rugged skin. But as the tide falls, the sand pulls back like a curtain, revealing a stage set long before anyone living now was born. And as the water retreats, you begin to see them, stones that resemble figures emerging from sleep. Some are upright, though leaning, as if waking from centuries of slumber. Some are half buried, as if sinking back into dreams. Others lie flat, long and smooth, with curved edges that almost look like ribs or shoulders softened by time. And when the waves come in again, as they always do, with a kind of solemn inevitability they cover the stones gently, like a blanket, and the figures vanish beneath the rolling sea. For this reason, the islanders say the tide remembers them, not the people, not even the sea, but the tide itself, as though it has its own memory, its own devotion, its own ritual of uncovering and hiding these figures with each passing day. The first written mention of these stones appears in a traveler's notes from the early 1800s, when a wandering antiquarian named Edmund Corrigan visited the western coast of Achille. He didn't come looking for stones. He came seeking tales of fairy forts, lost monasteries, and the ruins of old famine villages. But one cold evening, as he stood near a cluster of fishermen mending their nets, he heard a man speak of the idols that come and go with the tide. Corrigan, curious and easily fascinated, followed the fisherman's directions the next morning. His journal describes the stones as shapes of improbable symmetry for mere accident. He writes of one stone in particular, a long pillar, lying horizontally near the tide line, with a rounded top and an indentation that might resemble the calm face of a sleeper if seen at a glance or under poor light. Corrigan believed the stones to be glacial remnants, carried and shaped by the slow movement of ice thousands of years before. Yet, in the same breath, he admitted there was something uncanny about them. It is not their shape alone, he wrote, but the way the tide reveals and conceals them, as though performing some ancient rite. Local islanders had no desire for scientific explanations. They had their own stories, some spoken softly, some told half-jokingly, and some avoided entirely. One tale said the stones were once people, an ancient community turned to rock for breaking a taboo long forgotten. Another legend claimed they were guardians placed by a vanished culture older than the Celts, meant to face the sea and watch for something that never arrived. A third story insisted that they were offerings to a sea spirit, a being whose name, if it ever existed, had been lost to the centuries. Whatever the truth, the stones remained, shifting slightly in position after great storms, but always returning in some form as the tide moved out, like a story retold but never fully understood. To walk among them if you come at the right hour, on the right day, when the tide has left enough of the shore uncovered, is to feel as though you've stepped into a place suspended between time and something older than time. The sand is cool beneath your feet, firm where the water has just receded, and the air carries the taste of salt and distant rain. Gulls circle overhead, their cries echoing like the remnants of forgotten languages. And there, rising out of the sand like a gathering of ancient sleepers, the stones wait. The largest of them stands nearly 6 feet tall. Its surface is rough, marked by tiny fractures where the sea has worn at it for centuries. But its shape, tapered at the top, wider at the base, gives it the faint impression of a hooded figure. When the shadows fall at certain angles, the indentation near its upper third might almost be an eye, or perhaps the hint of where an eye should be. Beside it, several smaller stones lie in configurations that feel almost deliberate. One looks like a torso half sunken into the ground. Another resembles a face turned upward, its nose formed by a natural ridge, its mouth suggested by a subtle crease carved by time and erosion. No two people describe the stones exactly the same way. They seem to shift depending on the viewer's expectations, their mood, or even the angle of the sun. Some claim the stones look more like figures during winter, when the wind carves fresh patterns into the sand, and the sea brings new shapes from beneath the waves. Others say they appear most clearly in summer, when the low evening light brushes each surface with gold. And others insist that the stones' shapes are not constant at all, that after storms, they sometimes seem subtly different, as though they rearrange themselves while hidden beneath the churning tide. Scientists, when consulted, often dismiss such ideas as mere pareidolia, the tendency for the human mind to impose familiar patterns, especially faces, upon random objects. But islanders know better, or at least, they feel better. Their knowledge isn't written in textbooks. It's written in the ways their grandparents spoke, the ways fishermen glance toward the shore at twilight, the ways children grow quiet when the wind shifts and the tide begins to rise. If you sit beside the stones at low tide, the world around you begins to change. Time stretches, the sea breathes in deeper cycles, the gulls grow quieter, and the stones begin to seem less like objects and more like presences. They don't move, not in any literal sense, but there is a weight to them, an awareness, as if they hold their own silent memories of storms, of vanished people, of eras long beyond recall. It is easy to imagine them as watchers, not guardians, not protectors, just watchers, beings whose purpose is simply to observe, to endure, to remember what the tide reveals and what it takes away. The earliest inhabitants of Akil left little behind beyond traces of dwellings, shards of pottery, and faint ridges of what might have been ancient field walls. But some archaeologists believe the island was settled during the Neolithic, perhaps as early as 5,000 years ago. If the stones were meaningful to those early inhabitants, if they were seen as markers, or idols, or ancestral spirits, there are no surviving records to tell us. The people of that age left no written language, no carved inscriptions, no detailed symbols that could explain their beliefs. And so the stones remain unexplained. Yet, even in their silence, they speak in ways that words cannot. They hold the island's memory, not in any human sense, but in their sheer presence. They are reminders of how landscapes can shape belief, how natural forms can become mirrors for the stories people need to tell. There is one story, rarely shared, that tells of a woman who lived on Akil in the late 19th century. Her name has been lost to time, though some say she was called Myri. Others say she was Nora. She was known to walk the shoreline alone at dusk, her shawl wrapped tightly against the wind, her steps slow and steady. Some thought she was mourning. Others believed she was communing with something the rest had forgotten. One evening, after a powerful storm, she claimed she saw a new stone among the others, a stone shaped uncannily, like a young child curled as if asleep. Where it had come from, she didn't know. She said the sea had brought it, placing it gently upon the sand, as though returning something once taken. For weeks afterward, she visited that stone each day, sometimes sitting beside it for hours. Then, one morning, when the tide receded, the stone was gone, taken back into the deep. Some said it sank into a hollow left by the storm. Others insisted the sea had reclaimed what it had briefly offered. Myre or Nora spoke little after that. But when she did, she said one thing that people still whisper about. The sea remembers its own. Whether she meant the stone or something else entirely, no one knows. In more recent decades, tourists have stumbled upon the stones by accident. They take photographs, unsure of what they're seeing. Some feel unsettled. Others feel oddly calmed. A few report a strange sensation, as though being watched not by anything threatening, but by something ancient and indifferent, something that sees everything and judges nothing. Even today, the stones shift subtly beneath storm tides. After heavy winters, new stones are sometimes revealed, or old ones vanish deeper beneath the sand. The shapes seem to change with time, though whether this is natural erosion or something more mysterious depends on who you ask. Yet, no matter how the stones change, no matter how they appear or disappear, one pattern remains constant. Whenever the tide goes out, the idols reappear, patient, silent, waiting, because the tide remembers them, and perhaps, in its own way, they remember the tide. The statues that winter half buried. High in the Canadian Rockies, where winter lingers longer than any season has a right to, there is a valley that the maps acknowledge only reluctantly. It is a place caught between towering ridges of limestone and ancient shale, a place where the forests thin and the wind drags a low, hollow sound along the frozen ground. If you travel far enough into this valley past the last lines of pines, past the cold streams that freeze mid-whisper, past the snowfields that lie untouched, except for the occasional deer track, you will find shapes rising from the earth that look like something waiting. They are the hoodoos of the high passes, though those who live closest rarely call them by that name. To the geologists, they are towers of stone, carved by frost, sun, wind, and time, pillars formed through the slow subtraction of everything that does not belong. To the old ranch families, the trappers, and the handful of First Nations elders who have watched this valley longer than any scientist, these stones have other names. The statues that winter half buried, the watchers of the drifts, the ones who stay standing after every storm. No one remembers who first compared them to statues, or who decided they looked like figures at all. Perhaps it was the way the shadows fall as the sun sets behind distant peaks, giving each stone pillar the faint outline of shoulders or profiles. Perhaps it was the silence that fills the valley at dusk, a silence so complete that any shape, no matter how natural, begins to feel as though it is listening. Or perhaps it was because the hoodoos simply look too deliberate, too poised, too human to be accidents of wind and frost. When you approach them, especially in late autumn before the snow seals the valley, the ground crunches faintly with early frost. The air carries a sharpness that settles into your lungs, almost metallic, almost forgotten by anyone who has lived too long in warmer places. The first hoodoo you see is a narrow column rising nearly 15 feet into the air, its top crowned by a flat slab of rock that balances with impossible precision. It looks like a tall figure wearing a broad, weathered hat. Beneath that stone hat, the column narrows as though forming a neck, then widens into a shape that could be mistaken for a torso. Shadows gather in its creases, giving the illusion of folded arms or draped fabric. Beside it, another hoodoo stands thicker, broader, its crown top sloping gently to one side. In the dusk light, its curved silhouette resembles a head turned just slightly, as though gazing across the valley towards something only it can see. Others stand in clusters, some tall and gaunt, some worn down to stumps, some tapered like robed figures, some crooked as though frozen mid-motion. They rise from the white ground like a gathering of ancient watchers who were caught, centuries ago, in the act of stepping forward and simply stopped. What makes them haunting is not only their resemblance to human forms, it is the way they interact with the seasons. In summer, when the valley thaws and the creeks wake with meltwater, the hoodoos stand fully visible bare stone under bright sun. They look old, weathered, sculpted by a million small moments of erosion. They are impressive, but not particularly mysterious. Tourists who make the strenuous trek often comment on their strange beauty, take photographs, and leave with the belief that they have seen something unusual but explainable. But winter changes everything. The first snow arrives early here, sometimes as soon as late September. It blows in silently over the ridgelines, gathers in soft blankets around the bases of the hoodoos, and begins to shape the valley into something quieter, slower, more patient. As each storm adds its weight of white, the stones begin to vanish, first their bases, then the lower halves of their bodies, then the slopes and ridges that give them their familiar forms. By midwinter, only their crowns remain visible, dark stone caps emerging from endless waves of snow, like the heads of giant figures buried up to their shoulders. The valley becomes a field of white punctuated by these dark silhouettes, each one seeming to rise directly from the frozen earth. In winter, they do not look like stones at all. They look like statues trapped by snowfall, waiting for warmth to return and free them from the drifts. Those who have seen the valley in winter return with stories that sound remarkably similar, even when told by people who never met. They say that the hoodoos feel closer in winter, though the snow around them makes the valley seem larger. They say the silence grows heavier, as if the air itself stops moving. They say the wind shifts unpredictably near the stones, carrying faint echoes that sound almost like voices swallowed by snow. One hiker, nearly 20 years ago, claimed that as she stood near a half-buried hoodoo, she felt as though she were being studied calmly, without menace, but with an ancient attention older than the mountains themselves. Another traveler described a sensation of standing among a council of tall figures who had gathered for a purpose he could not understand. And once, during an unexpectedly late storm in April, a pair of backcountry skiers swore they heard a low groan ripple through the valley, a sound that seemed to come from beneath the snow, deep below the hoodoo's hidden forms. Geologists, when presented with these accounts, smile politely. They speak of the way wind moves across uneven terrain, creating tones that the human ear interprets as voices. They explain how snow settling can produce groans and cracks. They point to photographs of hoodoos in summer, recognizable for what they are, ordinary pillars shaped by erosion. And yet, the stories persist. Because even the most rational visitor admits that there is something about the valley, especially in winter, that feels different. As if The hoodoos are not simply stone, but memory. As if they have witnessed storms older than human history, winters deeper than any person could survive, melt cycles that have shaved and carved them into the ambiguous shapes they now hold. There is a tale among the local First Nations communities that predates modern geological study by centuries. It tells of stone beings who once walked the valley during a time when the world was new and the seasons had not yet settled into their rhythm. These beings shaped the land as they moved, carving rivers, raising mountains, smoothing ridges with their long strides. But when winter first came, a winter far colder than today, a winter of deep sky and silence, the beings grew tired. They stood still to rest, and the snow covered them. By the time spring returned, they had become stone. In the old language, they are sometimes called the ones who stayed standing. It is not meant as a warning or a threat. It is, instead, a story about endurance, about how some parts of the land become part of the world itself, simply by staying where they are long enough, through enough winters, until their presence shapes the valley around them. Whether or not this story was meant to refer to the hoodoos specifically is debated. But once you've seen them, especially in a winter storm, their silhouettes rising from the drifts like ancient figures, you begin to understand why the story exists at all. To reach the valley, you must follow a narrow path that winds between evergreens bowed beneath the weight of ice. Your steps crunch softly in the snow, and the cold presses close, numbing but strangely comforting. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. Wildlife here moves with caution, snowshoe hares leaving delicate prints, elk passing silently through the trees, occasionally a solitary wolf stepping where the snow is least deep. Every sound feels amplified. The distant crack of a shifting tree trunk, the soft fluttering of snow shaken from a high branch, the distant echo of the wind brushing along the ridge. Then you step into the clearing. It is a wide valley floor surrounded by cliffs and ancient slopes. The sky here feels larger, the light softer, diffused by snow particles suspended in the air. And rising from the drifts, spaced at uneven intervals but with a strange, accidental harmony, are the hoodoos. Some stand straight, their crowns dark against the white ground. Others lean. Some sit at angles that make them appear as though stepping forward. One, in particular, looks unmistakably like a robed figure with a bowed head. Another resembles the profile of a face carved by an unseen sculptor, though if you trace its features with your eyes a second time, the illusion shifts and dissolves. Hoodoos do not have fixed identities. They change with the sun, the clouds, the season, even the viewer's imagination. That is part of their magic, or their psychology, or their geology, depending on who you ask. During particularly harsh winters, when storms bury the valley in layers of snow taller than a person, only the very tops of the hoodoos remain visible. They protrude like dark islands in a seamless white sea. When the wind blows hard, snow swirls around them in spirals, forming temporary halos or drifts that climb halfway up their sides before falling away. It is said that, during such storms, the valley becomes a place of shifting visions, shapes appearing and vanishing in the whirling snow, figures rising briefly from the drifts only to dissolve back into white. Storm watchers describe these visions with a nervous laugh, attributing them to overactive imaginations. But some descriptions are so consistent, so similar between people who have no connection that it becomes difficult to dismiss them entirely. One man, a forest ranger stationed nearby in the early 1970s, wrote in his winter logbook about seeing figures moving slowly, too slowly, as if caught in thick water during a blizzard. He knew they were only the hoodoos, seen through layers of blowing snow, but he wrote that, for a moment, he could have sworn they were shifting toward him. Another witness, a hiker caught unexpectedly in a spring squall, said she saw something like a tall, silent crowd rising from the ground as the wind lifted snow from the shapes beneath. She described it as both beautiful and unsettling, a glimpse into something that felt older than the mountains themselves. There is no evidence, of course, that the hoodoos move. Their foundations are deep, carved into the underlying limestone, anchored through freeze-thaw cycles that would topple anything less stable. They are, by all geological accounts, firmly rooted. Yet the stories persist because the valley encourages imagination. It encourages the sense that you are not alone in the landscape, that the stone around you is more than stone, that the snow covering the world is more than weather, that the silence pressing in from all sides is not emptiness, but presence. Presence is the right word. If you stand among the hoodoos at the blue hour just before nightfall, When the sun's last light grazes the mountain ridges, but does not reach the valley floor, the world takes on a liminal glow. The snow reflects a deep, bluish gray. The air feels suspended, motionless, and the hoodoo's dark silhouettes stand out sharply against the pale ground. This is the hour when many people say the statues feel most alive. They do not move, of course, but they seem to lean in, just slightly, as the shadows stretch long around their bases. Their forms become sharper, their presence stronger. The valley becomes a place of listening, a place where the wind drops away completely, as though holding its breath. There is an old rancher who still lives within a day's ride of the valley. He rarely goes there anymore, but in his youth he visited often, especially in winter. When asked what the valley feels like, he said, "It feels like the land is remembering something, and the hoodoos remember it too." What that something might be, he never explained. Perhaps he did not know. Perhaps he did not need to. Snow preserves memory in its own way. It erases footprints, buries the past, softens the sharp edges of things, and turns the familiar into the strange. The hoodoos, half buried each winter, become part of that memory, hidden, revealed, hidden again. The cycle repeats endlessly, giving them the appearance of beings that sink into sleep during the cold months and rise slowly with the spring thaw. In early spring, when the valley thaws, the snow melts gradually around the pillars, revealing more and more of their bodies each week. First, the crowns grow taller. Then the upper ridges of stone emerge, streaked with meltwater. Then the narrow midsections come into view, carved by centuries of freeze-thaw cycles into textures like ancient fabric. Finally, their bases appear revealed in patches as the last drifts recede. For those who have watched this process closely, it is difficult not to see it as awakening. One photographer, obsessed with documenting the hoodoos throughout the seasons, described the process as watching statues climb slowly out of the earth. His time-lapse sequences show the snow melting away, day by day, as the shapes grow taller, clearer, more defined. By midsummer, the hoodoos stand fully revealed, weathered, eroded, undeniably stone, yet still uncanny in their poise. They have no faces, not really, no carved eyes, no true limbs, but their forms hint at intention, as though shaped not by chaos but by a patient force that knew exactly what it wanted to leave behind. There is one hoodoo, the tallest, that locals call the Elder. It stands at the center of the valley, slightly separated from the others, as though presiding over the space. In winter, only the flat stone cap of the Elder is visible, rising from the snow like the head of a being buried far beneath the earth. When the wind shifts, snow curls around the cap, creating the illusion of hair or fur. In a blizzard, the Elder vanishes entirely, only to reappear once the storm passes, dark, silent, immovable. Legends say, the Elder once marked a boundary between two hunting territories, between two clans, between the living and the spirits of the mountains. In the old stories, the Elder was not carved but chosen by the land, set apart by its shape and presence, long before humans ever came into the valley. It was said to be a messenger between worlds, though what worlds those were is never clearly stated. Another hoodoo, smaller and more slender, leans at a gentle angle. In summer, it looks like a simple column, but in winter, when the snow buries its lower half and only the angled upper portion remains visible, it looks undeniably like a figure bending forward, listening carefully to the wind. This one is often called the listener. Every hoodoo has a name, but not official names, not mapped names. They have names given by those who visit them in solitude, names whispered between hikers, names passed down quietly between families: the watcher, the elder, the listener, the twin sisters, the one who leans, the sleeping stone, the outlier who faces the east. Each name adds another layer of story, another layer of meaning to shapes that technically have none. But this is the power of the hoodoos. They invite interpretation, they invite belief, they invite stories. And stories grow quickly in places where winter wipes away footprints and leaves only the shapes that refuse to fall. As you move among them, you begin to understand how humans have always tried to make sense of the unknown by giving it familiar forms. A tall stone becomes an elder, a leaning one becomes a listener, a pair becomes sisters, a cluster becomes a council. The valley becomes a gathering place for ancient forms of stone that outlast every storm. And the storms here are relentless. Winds roar through the valley with the force of a living thing. Snow falls sideways, carried in horizontal sheets that sting the skin. Trees bend beneath the weight. The hoodoos, half buried, endure it all. They do not fall. They do not move. They do not crack unless the land decides it is time. During one memorable storm in 2010, snow piled so high that the hoodoos disappeared completely buried under a seamless field of white. For nearly 2 weeks, the valley looked empty, as if the stones had finally succumbed to winter and sunk into the earth. But when the thaw came, they emerged again, unchanged, as though rising calmly from centuries of experience with storms far worse. Some say the hoodoos are guides, others say they are guardians. A few believe they are warnings, markers placed by nature to show where the land shifts unexpectedly, where hidden crevasses lurk beneath the snow, where ancient faults run deep below the surface. But most people, even those who spend little time thinking about the meaning of stone, agree on one thing. The hoodoos feel alive. Not alive in the way animals or people are alive. Not alive in the way trees or rivers move with intention, but alive in the way mountains are alive, in the way landscapes carry memory, in the way old places absorb the presence of those who travel through them. When night falls over the valley, the temperature drops sharply. The sky fills with stars that seem impossibly bright, undimmed by light pollution. The hoodoos cast faint shadows across the snow, long and thin. The air grows still. Even the animals retreat into dens or sheltered pockets of trees, and the valley becomes a vast, silent amphitheater of stone and shadow. If you sleep here, something few attempt and fewer repeat. The sounds of the night echo strangely, the crack of freezing rock expanding, the shift of snow sliding, the soft moan of the wind threading between pillars. It is easy, in such moments, to imagine the hoodoos communicating in ways too slow for human perception, cycles of shifting weight, microscopic fractures, long vibrations that travel through the earth itself. By morning, frost clings to everything. The sun rises slowly over the ridge, casting a pale gold light that barely warms the air. As the light touches the hoodoos, their shadows shrink, revealing more clearly the textures of their stone. Layers of sediment built over millions of years, eroded into curves and ridges that suggest forms recognizable but impossible. It is then, in the quiet morning, that you realize something about the statues that winter half buried. They do not need to move to feel alive. They do not need to speak to feel present. They do not need faces to be remembered. Their existence is a conversation between stone and snow, between time and weather, between what humans see and what the land does not bother explaining. Every winter buries them. Every spring reveals them. Every storm reshapes them. Every visitor reinterprets them. And through all of it, they remain. Silent, patient, watching, enduring. The valley has changed countless times. Rivers have shifted courses. Forests have grown and retreated. Animals have come and gone. Humans have passed through, some staying, many leaving, all of them temporary in a place where stones measure time differently. But the hoodoos stand. They always stand. Even when winter presses down with a weight that would crush lesser places. Even when the world forgets them for months at a time beneath unbroken snow. This is why they are called statues. Not because they were carved, but because they represent something unchanging, in a world that changes constantly. They are half buried each winter, yet always return. They disappear, yet remain. They endure storms that would erase other structures. They rise again with each thaw, patient as memory. And when you finally leave the valley, when you follow your own snow-crunching steps back toward the forests, the trail, the warmer places, you may find yourself glancing back one last time. You will see the dark crowns of the hoodoos rising from the pale ground. You will see their silhouettes still and watchful. You will see the way they stand as though waiting for the next snowfall to cover them again. And you might feel, for a moment, that they are watching you leave. Not with intention, not with eyes, not with any malice or expectation, but with the deep patience of stone that has weathered more winters than you can imagine. The statues that winter half buried do not ask to be remembered. They simply are. And that is enough. The idols that slept in ice. High in the Canadian Rockies, where the air thins into a pale, crystalline quiet, the Athabasca Glacier stretches like an immense white tongue, descending from the Columbia icefield. It is ancient in a way that feels almost impossible to comprehend, a body of ice older than cities, older than names, older than any story humans managed to write down before time swept those stories away. The glacier is alive, but not in the way creatures are alive. It breathes in centuries, exhales in millennia. It moves in inches, whispers in cracks, sighs in the slow, deep groans that rise from within its frozen heart. And beneath that enormous mass of ice, deep where light cannot find its way, sleep shapes that look almost like statues. Shapes that do not belong to the neat explanations printed on tourist signs or the tidy diagrams in geological pamphlets. Shapes that resemble figures, though no human hand carved them. Shapes that appear only when the ice shifts just right, when the meltwater washes across ancient layers and reveals a glimpse of what lies frozen far beneath. Shapes that locals, quietly and reluctantly, call the idols that slept in ice. The Athabasca Glacier is not a place where legends typically grow. It is cold, harsh, unforgiving, a place where wind cuts across the surface so sharply that it feels like it could peel thought from bone. A place where the sky is pale and immense, where the snowfields merge with the clouds until horizon and air and ground blur into one endless white. A place where, for miles in every direction, what lives must either be small, sheltered, or ancient enough to withstand the weight of time. Yet, even here, especially here, stories linger in the quiet spaces between wind gusts, in the hollow chambers beneath the ice, in the deep blue crevasses that descend farther than any rope can safely reach. Stories of frozen statues buried for centuries, stories of ancient forms revealed by warm summers, stories of shapes that appear at dusk, vanish by dawn, and return again when the glacier shifts. Stories whispered by guides, denied by scientists, feared by those who know the glacier best. To understand these idols, you must step onto the ice field as the day fades. You must hear the way the glacier moves, not loud, not violent, but in slow, steady murmurs. The cracks that ring like distant thunder, the low rumbles that travel through your boots, the faint sighs of ancient air trapped in bubbles the size of grains of sand, releasing their breath for the first time since long before human memory began. Walk far enough, and the ice beneath you changes color. At first it is white, textured with grit carried by the winds. Then it fades into transparent patches that look like glass. Finally, in places where meltwater pools before finding channels to sink into, the ice turns deep blue, so blue it feels unreal, like standing on a frozen piece of the night sky. It is in these deep blue places, these hollows where time has shaped the ice like sculptors shape marble, that the first hints of the idols appear. At first, the shapes seem accidental, a shadow beneath a layer of frost. A curve that looks like a shoulder but could be nothing more than the smooth arc of compressed ice. A ridge that echoes the outline of a kneeling figure, only to dissolve into plain translucence when you shift perspective. But the deeper you look, the more the shapes align, not perfectly, never in a way that defies natural explanation entirely, but in ways that slow the breath. The first idol anyone speaks of is the sleeper. It lies horizontally beneath several meters of ice, its form curved, like someone resting on their side. The glacier's pressure has elongated it, softened its shape, given it the appearance of a body draped in flowing robes. Near what resembles the head, there is a darker patch sediment trapped long ago that looks like hair. The face is smooth, almost featureless, yet unmistakably present. People who glimpse it say the sleeper looks peaceful, as though frozen in a dream too deep for centuries to disturb. The second idol is known simply as the one who knelt. This figure is more upright, curled slightly forward, encased in blue ice so clear that, on certain days in late summer, it seems only inches away. A slab of rock forms something like a shoulder. A seam in the ice creates a line that could be interpreted as an arm. The posture is humble, reverent, almost worshipful. Scientists attribute the shape to pressure ridges and historic rockfall. Guides who have worked the glacier for decades are less certain. The third idol is the most unsettling. It is called the Watcher. This one appears not under the ice, but within a crevasse that remains hidden most of the year. Only when the glacier fractures suddenly, as it does after warm days, when meltwater cuts deep channels, does the crevasse open wide enough for a glimpse. Inside, beyond the reach of any safe descent, a shadowed form rises vertically. It is tall, narrow, and unmistakably human-shaped. A mass of darker ice sits where a head should be. The arms, or what might be arms, are fused to the sides. Some say the Watcher's silhouette changes slightly each year, as if shifting under pressure. Others say it has not changed at all, not in the 100 years since it was first reported. Rangers advise against searching for it. not because they fear the shape itself, but because the glacier takes those who venture too close. Crevasses do not forgive curiosity, and the watcher stands beyond a line no sensible person crosses. There is no evidence, none, that any of these shapes are carved. The glacier is simply old, older than memory, older than anything humans might have built here. It has layers of snow compacted into ice that predates entire civilizations. It carries rocks from mountains now eroded away. It shifts, compresses, fractures, reforms. All of its shapes are accidents. And, yet, accidents can look like intention when millions of years are allowed to work upon them. Still, stories grow, even in cold places, especially in cold places. The Stony Nakota and Cree peoples who have lived near the ice field for generations speak of the glacier not as a place of idols, but as a living being, one with moods and memory, and a slow-moving spirit that people are wise to respect. They tell of figures frozen beneath the ice not as statues, but as echoes, memories preserved by the glacier, remnants of a world that once existed before the world we know. One story says that long ago, when the mountains were forming and the spirits of earth and sky shaped the land, figures made of stone walked the ridgelines. They carried knowledge from one peak to another, passing messages between the spirits of rock and cloud. But when the great snows came for the first time, when winter arrived in a form no one had ever seen, the stone figures grew cold and tired. They lay down upon the mountainside to rest, and the snow covered them. When the glaciers formed, they became frozen in place. The ice carried them slowly, year after year, toward the valley below. Whether the shapes in the glacier resemble those mythical beings is impossible to say, but the idea persists, that the glacier remembers, that it holds on to shapes the earth once knew. Another story, rarely told and always whispered, says that there were people long ago, long before any nation we know, who lived near the ice field and revered it. They believed the glacier to be a boundary between worlds, a place where spirits crossed, a place where the living could hear the dead in the cracking of ice. Some believe those people shaped the early stones now frozen within the mass. Some believe they placed figures onto the glacier deliberately, offering them to the cold. No evidence supports any of this, but the stories remain, and the idols remain. In recent decades, as the glacier retreats, more shapes have appeared, strange curves in the meltwater channels, silhouettes glimpsed beneath thinning layers, outlines that resemble forms long hidden. Guides say that when the sun is low, when light slants across the ice just so, shadows inside the glacier shift like bodies turning in sleep. In late summer, when the blue ice windows grow clearer, dozens of people have reported seeing a form that looks like a small child curled beneath 2 meters of ice. The resemblance is haunting: rounded head, tucked knees, arms drawn to the chest. Geologists quickly identify it as a compressed lens of older snow, distorted by melt cycles. But even they admit the shape is uncanny. There is another place farther up the glacier, accessible only with ropes and deep knowledge of the ice, where a dark mass pressed against a translucent wall bears the unmistakable slope of a human back, not carved, not placed, just shaped by time into something recognizable. If you stand by this shape long enough, you begin to imagine you can see ribs, then shoulders, then the faint suggestion of a face turned downward in timeless stillness. The ice softens everything it touches. Forms become vague, dreamy, almost fluid. Edges blur, details vanish. What remains is the impression of something ancient, something captured in a moment that will outlast the entire world. When you move deeper into the glacier's domain, far from the tour buses, far from the short boardwalk paths, far from the safe viewpoints, the air becomes colder in a way that feels personal. The wind carries crystals that sting your cheeks. The snow crunches with a sound that seems older than footsteps. The ice beneath you shifts occasionally, a deep, resonant tone that makes your stomach tighten even though the ground does not move. The glacier feels alive because it is, living as ice lives, slow, patient, unbothered by the brief worries of living things. Standing on its surface as dusk falls is like standing on the breathing chest of a sleeping god, one whose dreams take centuries to unfold, and beneath that chest are the idols. Deep, deep down, where pressure turns snow into glass, and glass into stone like ice, down where light never goes, down where scientists lower instruments that return strange readings, long pauses, unexplained vibrations, low hums that travel differently through certain layers of ice. One researcher, during a brief warm spell in the early 2000s, recorded strange acoustic signatures from deep within a melt shaft. He described the sound as a rhythmic pulse, irregular, but too patterned to be random. His findings were dismissed. His equipment was blamed. The glacier was officially silent. But he never retracted his notes. He simply added one line at the end of his report. It sounded like something turning in its sleep. During spring thaws, when meltwater forms wide pools on the glacier's surface, the ice grows clearer than at any other time of year. It is then that the idols appear most vividly, like shapes seen through blue glass, blurred but undeniable. And when autumn arrives, when temperatures drop again and the glacier hardens, the idols blur back into indistinct forms, losing detail until they resemble only shadows. By winter, they vanish entirely beneath layers of new snow, sleeping deeper than ever, waiting for another thaw to reveal them. Every year, the glacier shrinks. Every year, more of its hidden interior becomes visible. Every year, the idols emerge a little more. Some say that when the glacier finally melts completely, if it does, those shapes will thaw into nothing, no longer preserved by cold. Others believe the idols will reveal themselves fully for the first time, rising from centuries of entombment, like figures stepping out of dreams. There is a place near the glacier's edge, where the ice caves formed by meltwater create chambers resembling cathedral naves. The ceilings curve in sweeping arcs. Pillars of blue ice rise from the floor, like ancient columns. Water drips rhythmically from the ceiling, echoing like distant footsteps. In the back of one such chamber, explorers once found a shape smooth, tall, unmistakably human-like, pressed against the ice with its face turned outward, as though watching the entrance. That chamber collapsed the following spring. The figure was sealed away again. No one saw it afterward. Some believe the glacier hides what it wants to hide, reveals what it chooses to reveal, takes what steps onto it unprepared, protects what sleeps inside it. There is an odd feeling that hangs in the air here, a sense of being watched, not with malice, not with interest, but with the timeless indifference of something that has existed since long before humans tried to understand it. The idols, half formed by nature, half imagined by humans, are part of that feeling. They are expressions of awe carved into ice by people trying to make sense of shadows. They are reflections of our urge to find meaning in shapes. But they are also more than that. Because when you stand on the glacier and hear the deep rumble of shifting ice, the idols do not feel imaginary, they feel present, as if frozen things remember. As if the glacier carries memory in its layers the way trees carry rings. As if every era that passed over this land left shadows in the ice, and those shadows sometimes resemble forms. And those forms resemble figures, and those figures, whether statues, illusions, echoes, or simply shapes, seem to sleep. Deep, silent, dreaming in blue. The idols that slept in ice may have no story in history books, no origin myths written by ancient hands, no names carved in stone, but they exist in the quiet, in the crevasses, in the frozen chambers beneath 10,000 winters, in the deep thrum of the glacier's breath. And each summer, when meltwater reveals them for just a moment, they remind anyone who sees them that time moves differently in the cold, that ice remembers, that mountains dream, that shadows frozen for centuries can resemble things we are not prepared to understand. And when you finally step off the glacier, feeling the solid ground again, hearing the familiar crunch of gravel and snow, you may glance back one last time. The glacier will look still, quiet, unmoving, as if nothing sleeps beneath it, as if no ancient shapes wait in the blue depths, as if no idols were ever held in its frozen heart. But you will remember what you saw, or thought you saw, or almost saw, and you will know in the way people know things without words, that something sleeps in the ice, something old, something patient, something shaped by time itself. The idols that slept in ice will sleep again, until the next warm season, until the next melt, until the glacier takes its next quiet breath and shifts just enough to reveal another dream beneath its frozen skin. The statue that slept in the tundra, far above the tree line, past the last dwarf willows that crawl close to the earth for warmth, past the final traces of human settlement, the Arctic stretches outward in a vast, unbroken expanse of silence. Here the land seems flattened not by emptiness, but by time itself. The horizon surrounds you in every direction, a circular boundary between white earth and pale sky that feels as though it has existed long before the first human footstep touched these frozen plains. In Nunavut, where the tundra breathes in long, icy sighs, and the wind carries stories across distances so great they lose their beginnings. There are places where the land rises just slightly low ridges, scattered boulders, ancient glacial scars, and among these features stand shapes that look like they were placed intentionally, though no hand ever carved them. Tall pillars, long stones, balanced upright, strange vertical slabs rising from an otherwise flat, endless land. Monoliths lonely, cold, and unspeaking. Most are simple, remnants of glacial deposits, erratics dragged across the land thousands of years ago. But one of these monoliths is different. So different that even the most seasoned hunters pause when passing it. So different that elders lower their voices when speaking of it. So different that scientists photograph it repeatedly, searching for angles that explain its uncanny resemblance to something human. They call it, quietly and without ceremony, the statue that slept in the tundra. It rises from the permafrost like a figure frozen mid-step, its form shaped not by tools but by wind and time. In the endless flatness of the Arctic, where every feature stands out sharply, the monolith resembles a tall being wrapped in a heavy robe, leaning slightly as though listening to the snow-laden wind. From a distance, it is unmistakable. From up close, it becomes something more. The stone is dark, weathered, marked by centuries of blowing ice crystals that have smoothed its edges and carved faint striations across its surface. The head is a rounded cap of granite, heavier and broader than the column beneath it. The shoulders slope with surprising symmetry. Along its front, erosion has formed a vertical groove that, in certain light, resembles the fold of a garment. No one claims it is carved. No one claims it is man-made. And yet no one sees it as merely a stone. It has presence. It has posture. It has the quiet gravity of something that has stood through countless winters and remembers all of them. To reach it, you must walk far across the tundra, where every step crunches on frozen moss and lichen that have survived longer than any civilization. The cold here is not simply temperature, it is a weight, a pressure in the air, a clarity that strips sound from the world. The wind moves freely across the land, carrying no scent of trees or soil, only the dry fragrance of snow and ancient cold. As you cross the landscape, the fording monolith begins to rise slowly on the horizon, like a distant traveler approaching you. At first it appears small. Then, as the miles shrink the distance, it grows taller, more defined. Its silhouette becomes unmistakable, a figure standing alone in a place where nothing stands unless it has been there for centuries. Those who have approached it describe a strange sensation, that the world grows quieter as you draw near. Not silent. Silence is the default state of the tundra, but quieter in a way that feels intentional, as if the space around the stone holds its breath. The statue rises nearly 12 feet high. Its base is partially buried in the permafrost, encased in a shallow ring of snow that never fully melts. The stone's weight is immense, thousands of pounds of granite carried here by ancient ice. It is a geological artifact, a remnant of glacial retreat, yet its shape is undeniable. It looks like a figure resting, waiting, sleeping, a presence half awake. Hunters from nearby communities say the stone has always been there. Their grandparents saw it. Their grandparents before them. Some stories say the stone moved long ago just slightly, enough that people noticed it stood differently from one generation to the next. But these are stories, not claims. No one insists on them. No one demands belief. They simply say, the stone has a long memory. There is an older story, rarely told outside of winter gatherings, that speaks of a wandering spirit who crossed the tundra during the first long night. The spirit grew tired and stopped to rest. When dawn finally returned after months of darkness, the spirit had become stone, frozen forever by the cold. This, the story says, is why the monolith stands alone. It is a reminder that even spirits tire in the Arctic. Another version of the tale says the stone is a watcher, placed by unseen forces to mark the boundary between safe lands and lands where storms are born. It stands facing the prevailing wind, as if continually bracing against the blizzards that sweep across the plains each winter. The monolith's shape changes subtly with the seasons. In summer, when the tundra blooms, tiny flowers pink, yellow, white, the stone appears almost gentle, softened by the contrast. The ground thaws around it, revealing more of its base. Sunlight catches on its surface, revealing flecks of quartz and mica. It looks like a sentinel overlooking a brief season of life. But in winter, when snow rises high and the Arctic night lasts months, the monolith becomes something else entirely. The wind drifts snow against its base, until only the upper half remains visible. Ice forms a thin glaze along its shoulders. Frost patterns gather in delicate, crystalline feathers across its front, giving it the appearance of wearing a cloak stitched from frozen breath. During blizzards, when visibility drops to a few feet, the monolith becomes a looming shape, half hidden, half revealed, moving only because the shifting snow makes it seem so. Many travelers report seeing the stone appear suddenly from the white void, as if stepping forward through the storm. One such account, written by an RCMP officer in 1974, describes the moment he stumbled upon the monolith during a whiteout. He believed, for several seconds, that a person stood in front of him. Only when the wind shifted and the snow parted did he recognize the stone and step back with a shudder. He wrote later that the experience left him with the feeling of having woken something by accident. Another traveler, a geologist mapping permafrost layers, spent an hour near the monolith taking measurements. Later, she admitted privately that she felt as though she were being watched, not by anything malicious, not by anything living, but by something aware. She returned home with photographs that, under certain shadows, make the stone look like a tall figure wearing a hood. The statue that slept in the tundra has no official name, no plaque, no survey marker, no designation in records. It simply exists, as it has for thousands of years. During autumn, when the light becomes low and golden for hours before sunset, the monolith casts a long shadow across the tundra. The shadow stretches far, thin and elongated, a dark reminder of the shape that stands unmoving in the cold. In late spring, when the last snow melts unevenly around it, the stone stands exposed in a patch of bare ground, surrounded by pools of meltwater that reflect its shape. For a few days, the monolith looks isolated, rising from a mirror of still, cold water like a figure waking from slumber. Some researchers believe the stone's distinctive shape is entirely natural, the result of weathering, freeze-thaw cycles, and inherited fractures from its original formation. They note that many Arctic monoliths take on humanoid forms because of the way wind accelerates erosion at specific heights. They explain the resemblance rationally, calmly, confidently. But even these scientists admit they feel something unusual near the stone. They say the air temperature seems slightly different, colder in some seasons, warmer in others. They say the wind behaves oddly, as though swirling differently around the monolith. They say the stone radiates a kind of presence that cannot be measured but also cannot be denied. In the deepest winter, under the long polar night, when stars burn with rare clarity and the aurora drapes the sky in green fire, the monolith becomes a silhouette against the sky. The northern lights ripple behind it, painting its edges with shifting color. The tundra glows faintly. The air vibrates with the electric pulse of charged particles, and the statue stands perfectly still, as though absorbing the light, storing it, remembering it. Those who have camped near it during such nights say the experience is strangely comforting. The stone feels like company, like an anchor in a landscape shaped by emptiness, like a reminder that something has stood here long before you and will remain long after. And yet there are moments rare, quiet, unsettling when the monolith feels less like a companion and more like something waiting for the thaw, waiting for the storm, waiting for something buried deep in the tundra to shift, waiting for time to reveal something not yet understood. One hunter tells a story of sleeping in a snow shelter near the stone during a windstorm. He awoke in the night to the sound of the wind slowing just briefly, followed by a deep, low vibration that seemed to rise from the ground itself. He felt it in his chest, not in his ears. When the wind returned, he lay awake for hours, listening, knowing somehow that the stone had shifted slightly under the snow. But the next morning, when he checked, the monolith had not moved at all. These stories are not meant to frighten. They are not spoken as warnings. They are simply ways of describing a feeling that humans have always experienced near ancient things. The quiet awareness that we walk through a world shaped by forces older than our understanding. The statue that slept in the tundra holds that feeling more strongly than most, because it stands alone, because it stands in silence, because it stands in a place where time moves differently, because it looks uncannily like something that once lived, and because winter buries it more deeply each year. The Arctic is warming, the permafrost is changing, the seasons grow unpredictable, and yet the monolith remains unchanged, rising, year after year, from drifts that reach its waist, then its shoulders, then sometimes its neck. Only the very top is always visible. Only the rounded cap remains above the snow, like a sleeper's head rising from a frozen blanket. When spring comes, the melt reverses the process. The head re-emerges, then the shoulders, then the full height. A slow unburial repeated every year. Sleep. Reveal. Sleep again. Those who have watched this cycle for decades say the monolith appears to breathe with the seasons exhaling during melt, inhaling when snow buries it again. It stands not just as stone, but as a record of countless winters, a memory of ice ages, a witness to migrations of animals long extinct, a companion to the ancient winds, a boundary between what is known and what is guessed. And though it has no face, no arms, no carved symbols, no language, the statue carries an expression not of emotion, but of endurance. In its presence, you feel the passage of time differently. Footsteps feel temporary. Breath clouds pass too quickly. Voices vanish into the air. Storms come and go. Seasons shift. Human memories fade. But the monolith remains. In the long dusk of Arctic autumn, the statue casts a silhouette so distinctly humanoid that your eyes play tricks. As you walk away, you may feel as though it is watching your departure not with interest or intent, but with the same passive awareness that mountains have, not alive, not dead, simply present, a presence shaped by cold, a presence carved by time, a presence waiting in the tundra for another 1,000 years of winter. When you finally turn your back and begin the long return across the frozen plain, the wind picks up again. Snow drifts around your legs. The tundra stretches outward in every direction, empty and endless. You look back one last time. The statue stands half-buried, unmoving, unbothered by the storm sweeping past it. It appears to lean slightly, though perhaps it is only the angle. Its rounded head glows faintly in the dim light. Its long shape blends into the white earth, and for a moment, no more than a heartbeat, you feel that the stone remembers you. Not personally, not intimately, but in the way the land remembers every footstep, every passing life, every small flicker of movement in a world shaped by stillness. The statue that slept in the tundra will sleep again tonight, and tomorrow, and for countless winters to come, waiting beneath the drifting snow, waiting beneath the stars, waiting beneath the endless Arctic sky, silent, enduring, remembering. The stone that waited for someone who never came. Across the great, wind-swept plains of Ukraine, where the horizon stretches so far that the sky seems heavier than the earth beneath it, there is a field that appears on no tourist map, marked by no signpost, claimed by no village. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a broad expanse of grass and soil, rolling gently with the shape of the land. In summer, it ripples with gold as wheat and wild grasses catch the wind. In winter, it becomes a muted palette of gray and white, the kind of place where snowdrifts form and dissolve with no witnesses except the quiet air. And in the very center of this field stands a single stone. It rises only a little above a person's waist, worn smooth by time, its surface pale and pitted. It is not impressive. It is not monumental. Yet anyone who walks near it feels something strange, a sense that the stone has been waiting for a very long time, waiting through storms, waiting through seasons, waiting through centuries, waiting for someone who should have come long ago. It is known, whisperingly, and without ceremony, as the stone that waited for someone who never came. Most people who pass it do so by accident. A farmer cutting across the land with a tractor, a shepherd moving a small flock in late spring, a traveler who wandered off the main road and found themselves in a place where silence gathers like dew. All of them report the same thing. The stone stands alone, completely alone, as though the world has grown around it but never touched its purpose. The land surrounding it bears no sign of settlement. No ruins lie buried beneath the grass. No ancient foundation stones peek from beneath the soil. No roads once led here. No burial mounds sit nearby. And yet the stone stands with an air of intention as though someone, long ago, placed it exactly where it is. If you walk toward it, the wind seems to grow quieter. The air cools slightly, even on warm days. The grass shifts differently, bending around the stone as if acknowledging its presence. When you stand before it, the world feels strangely symmetrical, as though the fields fall evenly away on all sides. The horizon draws a perfect circle around you, the kind of geometric alignment that feels too perfect to be accidental. The stone is roughly carved, though whether by human hands or weather is impossible to tell. One side is flat, rising almost like a narrow pillar. The other is irregular, marked by small hollows and ridges that look like the faint remains of some long-erased inscription. If you run your hand along the surface, you feel the coldness of granite, the grit of sand deposits, the slight warmth where the sun has touched it. But most of all, you feel the weight of time. It is a stone that has endured countless winters, each one layering it with frost, each thaw carving minute changes into its surface. It has witnessed armies pass across the plains, unseen by soldiers who marched too quickly to notice. It has stood through famines, storms, migrations, resettlements. It has stood through eras when borders shifted like the wind. It has stood through periods when the field was farmland, then meadow, then pasture, then barren, then overgrown. Yet through it all, the stone remained where it was placed, never falling, never sinking, never cracking. Some locals say the stone marks a grave. Others say it marks a boundary between long-forgotten settlements. A few believe it marks a promise one made by someone who vowed to return, but no graves have been found near it. No artifacts lie buried in the soil around it. No historical record mentions such a marker in this area, and no one knows who, if anyone, was meant to return. The only thing certain is that the stone feels like a sign of something unfinished. One old farmer from a nearby village tells a story passed down from his great-grandfather. According to the tale, the stone was placed there by a traveler who waited for his brother to return from a long journey. When the brother never came back, the traveler left the stone as a mark of where they were supposed to meet, promising to return each year to see if his brother had arrived. But the traveler, too, eventually disappeared, lost in war, or illness, or age, and the stone became the only thing left of their promise. There is no proof of this story. It is just one of many quiet legends that cling to the plains. Yet, when you stand in the field with the wind brushing past your ears, it is easy to imagine someone waiting here year after year, season after season, watching the horizon for a figure who never appeared. Another legend says the stone marks the spot where a messenger once fell during a time of hardship. The messenger carried news that would have changed everything for a nearby settlement, but he collapsed in the open field, the message undelivered. When the villagers later searched for him, they found only his frozen body and placed a stone to honor him. The settlement eventually vanished, swallowed by time, but the stone remained. Again, there is no evidence, only belief, only whispers carried along the grass. Some elders speak of the stone as though it is alive, not literally, but in the sense that it feels presence. They say that animals avoid walking too close to it, that birds never land on it, that snow melts differently around it, forming rings that shift from year to year in patterns that seem too consistent to be random. They say the stone remembers the footsteps of those who were meant to return, though they never explain what they mean. In summer mornings, when the sun rises behind the far hills, the stone casts a long shadow across the dew-covered grass. It looks then like a sundial with no center, marking not hours, but centuries. In winter, when snow covers everything in a pale blanket, the stone protrudes from the drifts, like the last remnant of a forgotten monument. At dusk, when the sky turns pink and gold over the wide plains, the stone takes on a strange stillness. The air cools rapidly. The grass stops shifting. Even the insects fall silent. It feels then like the stone is listening, waiting again for footsteps that have not echoed here for hundreds of years. Some scholars have visited the field. They measure the stone. They record its mineral composition. They note its height and width. They map the surrounding land. They debate whether the stone was part of an ancient boundary marker system used by early Slavic tribes, or a glacial leftover shaped unnaturally by freeze-thaw cycles, or perhaps a piece of a larger megalithic arrangement long since dismantled or destroyed. None of them can say for certain. None of them offer a conclusive explanation. But every scholar who has spent time near the stone acknowledges, sometimes reluctantly, that being beside it feels strange. The kind of strange that comes not from fear, but from the sense that you are standing in a place where something was supposed to happen, something important, something that never occurred. A few describe it as a feeling of paused history. The field surrounding the stone has its own silence, different from the silence of forests or mountains. It is a silence that carries weight, as though layers of time have compacted here, pressing all noise into the earth. Footsteps sound muted. Voices feel swallowed by the air. Even the wind seems to curve around the stone, diverting slightly, as though acknowledging a boundary. At night, when the moon rises full over the plains, the stone glows faintly. not with light, but with the reflective sheen of granite touched gently by lunar rays. The grass moves like waves around it. The sky above becomes vast and star-filled. The stone casts a shadow long enough to seem almost like a second figure standing beside it. It is not difficult, in that moment, to imagine the stone waiting again. Waiting for someone walking slowly across the plains. Waiting for a silhouette rising from the darkness. Waiting for a promise to finally be kept. In early autumn, when the harvest winds sweep across the land, the field sharply changes character. The grasses dry into brittle gold. The soil cracks faintly. The air becomes crisp. And the stone looks older than ever, as though decades pass each time a gust moves through. A hunter once camped near the stone during the height of the autumn storms. He said that during the night he heard footsteps not close, not threatening, but far away, echoing across the field as though someone was walking aimlessly through the grass. When he stepped outside his shelter and looked around, he saw no one. The field was empty, but the footsteps continued, circling the field, growing softer, then fading entirely as the wind changed. When he returned to camp the next morning, he noticed that a ring of grass around the stone had bent, as though something had stood there during the night. He never camped there, again. Long ago, during a war that swept across these plains, soldiers marching through the field noted the stone in their journals. One described it as a marker for a rendezvous that had been forgotten. Another said it made him think of his home village, where he had once promised to meet his brother again after the fighting ended. But the brother died before that meeting could happen, leaving the promise unfulfilled. The soldier wrote that the stone felt like the embodiment of all waiting that ends in nothing. Years later, a traveler passing through the field found a rusted button near the stone, one worn by soldiers of that era. Whether it belonged to the man who wrote the journal entry, no one knows, but the symbolism remains. More recently, an archaeologist visited the field with ground-penetrating equipment. She hoped to find traces of ancient structures, buried stones, or artifacts that might explain the monolith's placement. Her scans revealed nothing. The ground beneath the stone was unremarkable. No graves, no ruins, no man-made disturbances, and yet she wrote in her notes, "It feels like a meeting place with no meeting, a marker without a message, an invitation never answered." Others have tried to decipher the faint grooves on the surface of the stone. They found patterns that might once have been markings, but erosion has worn them to the point of meaninglessness, if they ever held meaning at all. Children from nearby villages are told not to play near the stone, not because it is dangerous, but because it belongs to the old world, a phrase that has no precise definition, but carries a sense of respect. Elders say the stone should be left undisturbed, not touched except in passing, not moved, not leaned on, not used as shelter. They say it is a reminder of a promise, but no one remembers what the promise was. No one remembers who made it, only that it was never fulfilled. One evening, a traveler approached the stone at sunset. He sat beside it for a long time, watching the sky change color. When he finally left, he said he felt a deep sadness not directed at anything specific, not tied to any thought, but something old and lingering, like the sadness of a story missing its ending. He turned around before leaving the field and swore the stone looked different, as though waiting more intensely, leaning ever so slightly, straining toward the horizon. Of course, stones do not lean. They do not turn. They do not wait. But standing in that field, you could believe that this one does. The stone is not tall. It is not grand. It is not dramatic. And yet its presence lingers in the mind long after you leave the field. As you walk away, the wind grows louder again. The grass returns to its shifting rhythm. The world resumes. But when you turn back, even from far away, the stone remains visible, a single shape rising from the flat land, unmistakable, solitary. It stands exactly where someone left it, exactly where someone was supposed to return, exactly where no one ever came. And though it carries no inscription, the stone feels like a sentence unfinished, a thought left incomplete, a gesture held open too long. The stone that waited for someone who never came still waits, not with hope, not with sorrow, not with expectation, but with the quiet endurance of something placed with purpose, left with purpose, and kept with purpose by the wind and earth. It will stand through more winters. It will stand through shifting borders and changing governments. It will stand through storms that flatten weaker structures. It will stand long after those who know its story have forgotten it, because waiting has become its only story, its only task. its only identity. A stone placed for someone who never returned, and now, a reminder of every unfinished promise scattered across the vast, patient plains. Thank you for wandering with us through these quiet mysteries shaped by time and silence. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Until our next tale, sleep well, and may the forgotten places watch over your dreams.